On today's Newsmakers, actor Gary Sinise joins us to talk all about life, faith, his passion for veterans, and so much more. With no further ado, here is Gary Sinise. Gary, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, and there's a lot to talk about. I want to start with your foundation and the work that you've done for so many veterans. You know, for those who don't know, and I know you've shared this story before, but I think it's an important one. What was it that got you started down this road of creating a foundation and doing the incredible work that you do?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. First of all, it's multiple things along the way. You know, I don't think it's just one thing. I think there were things that added up, and then there was a turning point where I just dove into action. I think, you know, of course, I've got a lot of veterans on my side of the family, my wife's side of the family. So I really think, you know, it begins kind of there. Her side of the family is Vietnam veterans, and I got very involved with them, sort of Vietnam veterans and supporting Vietnam veterans back in the 80s in Chicago when I was working in theater there. I was doing a lot of theater, and I had met my wife's two brothers and her sister's husband. He was a combat medic, and they started to kind of talk to me about Vietnam. I started asking them a lot of questions. And I'll tell you, the feeling that I remember most back then, prior to getting involved, was a feeling that I had of sort of shame and guilt as to how oblivious I was to what folks just a little bit older than I were going through at that time in the jungles of Southeast Asia, fighting the Vietnam War. It was on the television all the time during the early 70s when I was in high school. But I was playing guitar and, you know, doing theater and girls and, you know, all the distractions of being in high school. And
living your life.
Really,
you were living your life at the time.
I was just being a high school kid. And
Yeah.
you know, these brothers of my wife, they were just a little bit older than me, and they started to kind of tell me about what it was like to serve in Vietnam and come home from Vietnam and how difficult it was. And I started feeling kind of guilty about it. So later in the early 80s, I started working on some material that spoke to the Vietnam veteran experience, and I started getting involved with Vietnam veterans in the Chicago area, supporting them in different ways. And then about 10 years later, you know, I had moved to Hollywood, and in the late 80s, about 87, and in 1993, I got to audition to play Lieutenant Dan for Forrest Gump, and I got that part. And of course, he was a Vietnam veteran, and I very much wanted to play him just simply because of the Vietnam veteran experience that I'd had going back to the 80s, and wanting to do something to sort of honor the Vietnam veterans in my family and the ones that I'd met, you know, in Chicago, and started supporting. And those were the key elements that sort of teed everything up for what would happen after September 11th, 2001, when we were attacked and we started deploying to Afghanistan and Iraq. And that attack, that terrible day, was a turning point for me into a full-on service mission that, you know, manifested itself into the creation of my own foundation.
I have so many questions for you. Was it hard to make that decision, even after such an emotional and difficult day on 9/11, to know that a lot of your effort, and I know that this is where your passion is, would go towards something new and maybe deviate a little bit? You know, obviously you've had a successful career and continue to, but when you put energy towards something, you know, the other thing, there's going to be a little less energy going towards it when it comes to acting. Or was that an easy decision for you to say, this is where I am being led and this is the direction I'm going in now?
Well, of course, September 11th was 2001, and my heart was just broken, you know, like so many of us. You know, the images burned into my soul, you know, of what happened that terrible day. And I started raising my hand for the USO, just simply because I wanted to do something. I remember there was a moment. Do you remember the Friday after September 11th was, which was a Tuesday? The Friday after that Tuesday, President Bush had stated that he was kind of declaring that we would have a national day of prayer and remembrance for the victims of September 11th.
Yes, yes.
Friday, just a few days after the event, was kind of the churches and houses of worship all over the country were just jam packed with people trying to process what we'd been through, and people looking for some kind of peace, something that would help us through. And I went to our little Catholic church, in Malibu, and took the family, and it was so crowded that we couldn't sit down. And I was standing there holding my little daughter's hand, and tears rolling down my cheeks, and I came out of there. Either the priest said it in his homily that day, or I just heard it. I don't know, but about service to others was going to be the thing that helped us through. Service, serving others, pulling together to help each other out through this difficult time was going to be something that would help us all heal and help our nation heal. And so, whatever, whether he said it or not, I heard it. And I walked out of there and I started volunteering after that. And I raised my hand for the USO, and I started going on USO tours of the war zones. And I started a program where we were shipping school supplies to the troops over in Iraq and Afghanistan. They would take them out and give them to the kids in the villages. And that would, of course, be a great kind of, it was like our GIs in walking through Dresden handing out chocolate, after we firebombed Dresden. Well, here we are in the war zone, and we've got there's hostilities going on, but our troops pull in. They start unloading boxes of school supplies to the children, and all of a sudden things turn from apprehension and tension to like smiles. And so it was a very, very positive program. And I just started doing a lot of that because I visited schools when I was over there. I saw what our troops were doing to rebuild schools for the Iraqis. And so I wanted to help them out by giving them these school supplies. And we shipped hundreds of thousands of school supply kits in Ziploc bags. We put all these school supplies in Ziploc bags. It was called Operation Iraqi Children, and then we started shipping to Afghanistan and Djibouti and Haiti and all these different places, and so we called it Operation International Children. And that program lasted for 9 years. It was one of the programs that just generated out of this sense of, I want to help the troops out in some way. So I thought, I went to these schools, and these kids didn't have any supplies. So I thought, let's give the troops some supplies to give to the kids, and maybe that'll help things out. And we shipped hundreds of thousands of those kits over, supported by the American people who would donate to the program, or they would ship us supplies that they would pack up at their little school and ship them to us. And then we'd go through them, make sure everything was cool, and then we'd ship them on to our contacts in the war zones. And that was a great program. I just started doing stuff like that, just raising my hand and helping organizations out, starting little things, started a band. It all came from kind of this sense of not wanting to leave our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans feeling the way our Vietnam veterans felt, unsupported. The nation was divided at that time. They didn't get the welcome home they deserved. I was trying to make sure that people responding to the attacks of September 11th would feel appreciated, and that there was a grateful nation behind them.
And you've done that so beautifully in everything you've done through the foundation and all of your work. And I love that story because, a lot of people, they live, they work, they do the things they're going to do, and they don't think about serving others. And I think, not that there aren't people in Hollywood doing great things, there are, but I think the assumption is that when people are in Hollywood, they're going to live their life and they're going to move on. And you've lived a life of service for other people. And in that, I would imagine, and I want to talk in a minute about your Memorial Day concert in DC that you do every year, and we'll talk about that. But how has this changed you? How has this role of helping others and serving people who have served the country, how has that transformed your heart, your mind?
Well, greatly. I mean, it's once I started doing it, I wanted to do it again and again and again. I saw the impact that could be made when you simply showed up and put your arms around somebody and helped them through. And it made me feel better. Like I said, I just had this terrible feeling of fear after September 11th. Like, what was happening to our country? Are we
Yeah.
going to? You remember within months or weeks of those attacks, anthrax started going through the mail.
Yeah. Yep.
People started getting anthrax in the mail, and somebody was terrorizing our country by putting anthrax in envelopes and sending it to Congress people and all this. So I'm thinking, well, when is a terrorist going to come across the border with a backpack full of anthrax? And
Yeah.
what kind of world are we living in now? Are we just going to be under attack? And I was fearful for my country and fearful for my family. And fear is a great motivator. It always was for me as an actor. I remember because I was always scared I was going to stink. And so I just worked a lot harder. So
Yeah,
I
and
would,
you never have. You never have. That fear never came to fruition. You've always been an amazing actor. To your
fear of
point, though,
failure makes you work harder for sure.
well, it does. And to your point, I was a high school senior in the first week of school, my senior year when 9/11 happened. And I will never forget that day because it's a defining point. I mean, it's a defining moment, I think, for America, for the world in so many ways. Still, even today, I think it is. And I just remember that fear and that uncertainty and sort of this world that I had lived in as, a 17-year-old, where it was kind of shattered. And I think for a lot of people, it never really came back to a full normalcy to what it felt like before that day. I can't speak for others, but I know for me, I've often thought that. But to your point, that fear persisted for a very long time, and do you remember how everybody came together during that small period of time? And I don't remember how long it was, but it was like for a moment, Americans were really all one. I felt that for a while, and I loved that feeling. And I feel like I've never experienced or felt that level of togetherness in this country again since that time. I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all, but I often think
No,
about that.
no, you're right. It's true. The country really was trying to help each other out. We all were scared. I mean, if terrorists could take over airplanes, learn how to fly them right under our nose, taught by our pilots and our instructors, and then turn them on us and crash them into buildings, what else is going to happen? What if they would have had a nuclear weapon on one of those planes? They would have used it. So who's going to get a nuke? Is a nuke going to come across the border in a backpack now? Where people were starting to talk about suitcase nukes. Remember that?
Yeah.
And anthrax is flowing through the mail, and everybody was fearful. And I knew, okay, what can I do to help our country out? And there were people that were volunteering left and right to go join the military and to respond. And so I thought, well, as a performer, as an actor, there is something I can do. I can go out there and do the USO thing and help our troops out. So I started volunteering there. And once I started volunteering, going to the war zones and seeing what's showing up in a war zone, somebody like me, going all the way over there to see the troops and pat them on the back and say thank you and help them out during a difficult time. I could see what that was doing, and then it just made me want to do it again. When I started doing USO, the first trip I went on was June of 2003. So it's almost 22 years ago. And it was a big, giant tour. Kid Rock was on it, and Leanne Womack, Paul Rodriguez, Robert De Niro showed up. I mean, the Nappy Roots was there. There were football players, basketball players, cheerleaders. I mean, it was a giant tour. And I got on the tour. I was Lieutenant Dan, just shaking hands and taking pictures. And I was watching, Kid Rock perform and everything like that. Well, as soon as I got back, I just called the USO and said, where can I go now? And I didn't have a job at the time. And so they sent me out again. And then I went out again. And I did like 6 tours in 6 months. And by the time I was done with that, I knew I was in the game. This was something that was just, I felt that there was something I could do to help. And that made me feel better. It made me feel less fearful. because I was seeing, I was seeing our troops in action. I was seeing what they were doing over there. They took me out to visit schools they were rebuilding, and I was going to the hospitals. I was at Landstuhl Medical Center, and I was seeing, these families going through these long rehabilitations at Walter Reed and Bethesda. And I come in there and change the mood and make the day just a little bit better for somebody like that. The wounded in the hospital beds wanted to talk to me about Lieutenant Dan and that story. And of course, that story is a happy ending, right? Lieutenant Dan standing up at the end. So I could see all these things that I was doing were impactful, and getting involved with lots of different nonprofits to help them raise money and raise awareness so that they could help more people. That became just a full-time thing. I got a television series right around that time, and so I was on television every week. And I had this public platform now, weekly public platform. It wasn't like one movie comes out and then, months later, another one comes out.
Right.
When you're on television every week on a hit show, you have a public platform, and it came right at the right time. There's a chapter in my book, Grateful American, called Perfect Timing. And it's all about CSI New York dropping into my lap right at the time that I was ramping up all this military and first responder support. And so I used the public platform. You
saw it as a vehicle. You saw it as a vehicle to help, push through this really good work you were doing.
Well, that and making a living, of course.
Yeah. And working, yes.
Yeah, the other thing about making a living, but it was wonderful. I mean, I was on television every week for nine years, and I had this wonderful platform, and it was doing some good. And, now I was more well-known because I'm on television every week. And so I started taking the band overseas. We've done hundreds of shows now on military bases and hospitals.
You've done over 500 shows, like well over 500 shows, if I'm not mistaken. You've done a lot of shows. I mean,
yeah, these are amazing. I think I played 585 concerts and never made a dime for it. I mean, it's all part of the mission work. I pay my band. I'm grateful to the American people who donate to the Gary Sinise Foundation so that I can call up a base or call up a hospital and say, do you need some help? We want to come and play for you. And then we set it up and we pay for the whole thing. And it's paid for by the American people who trust that I'm going to do some good things with their generosity.
It's amazing. Your story is amazing. The work you've done is incredible. Now, you have this Memorial Day concert in DC that you do every year. Tell us a little bit about that and how people can experience that if they have interest.
That was another beautiful thing that just came along right at the right time. Like I said, I started doing USO shows in 2003. I did the first couple in Illinois. I did one in Chicago, just a small little thing, and we invited a bunch of troops that were associated with the USO in Chicago. And then about 6 months later, I did our first military base USO show at Great Lakes Naval Base. And then in 2004, the USO finally let me take these musicians. It was just kind of a jam band at that time. They let me take the musicians on a tour to Diego Garcia, which is down in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We have a military base there. Singapore, we have a naval base there. And then Korea, where we have multiple bases there. And I did that tour in 2004, February of 2004. I came back, I did more. I just kept saying, send me out, where can we go now? And so I was doing all these USO tours with the band. And my buddy Joe Mantegna, the year after September 11th attacks, he was invited to come and do a story for the National Memorial Day concert. And Joe said he didn't know about the National Memorial Day concert until they called him and asked him if he would come and act out this story. Well, he was acting out the story of somebody that I met, the following year. And I think Joe did it in 2002. 2003, I met the man that he did the story about. A man who lost both his sons on September 11th. He was a Marine, a retired Marine, and he was a, legendary retired firefighter named John Vigiano. And I met John on my first USO tour over to Iraq in June of 2003. Joe had done his story the year before. And in 2005, I get this call from Joe. Hey, I'm a part of this thing, the National Memorial Day concert. Have you ever heard of it? No, I hadn't heard of it. And it had been on television since the 90s on PBS, but I hadn't heard of it. And he invited me to come and be a part of a segment they were doing on the USO. He knew I was doing all this USO work. And so I said, this is perfect. I have a tour to Germany, Italy, and the UK. No, Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK in May of 2005. And the timing is perfect because we can fly straight from the UK to Washington, D.C. and make it in time to do the National Memorial Day concert. We get to D.C., we're standing on stage, 200,000 people sitting on the grass, and my band is playing for them. And again, I'm just a guy who plays cover tunes. I play like songs that everybody's going to like. I'm not a songwriter or anything like that. I just want to play music that everybody's going to enjoy. So we played a couple of cover tunes. We played Ain't No Mountain High Enough, and we played God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood. And they asked me to narrate some content also while I was there in the show. It's a 90-minute show with a lot of stories and music. And then they asked me the following year to come back and co-host it with Joe. So 2006, I went back and started co-hosting. So it's 20 years this year that I've been involved with the National Memorial Day concert, which is really the memorial service for our nation. If you watch it, it's powerful, it's moving, it's uplifting because of the stories that are told and the resilience of the people that have gone through things. It honors the fallen, which of course that's what Memorial Day is all about. And it's a beautiful show. This year we're May 25th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. We'll be back on stage, my 20th year, and I'm always eager to do it and happy to co-host it with my buddy Joe.
That's amazing. That's incredible. As we're talking about this right now, your foundation does a lot. What are some of the highlights maybe of what you're working on now? Maybe ways that the public could come alongside the foundation and help in any way?
Well, the foundation, it has a very broad mission, and I'll tell you, it's got a broad mission because, as I said, I got involved with a lot of different efforts before I started the foundation. We're about at the end of our 15th year.
Wow.
So our 15-year anniversary, all that, we coming up next month. And over the 15 years, we've raised about $525 million, $500 million deployed all over the place, doing all kinds of things. And we have such a broad mission because I learned all these different areas of need before I started the foundation. And I started the foundation so I could do more of that. I just wanted to help in whatever way I could. Now we have hundreds of thousands of donors that go to the foundation. We have multiple programs at the foundation, programs that support the families of our fallen heroes, our fallen military heroes, and fallen first responders. We build specially adapted smart technology, mortgage-free homes for our badly wounded service members. We've done 95 of those houses. We'll give away our 100th home this year.
Wow.
We have just multiple programs. And as I said, the Lieutenant Dan Band is a program of the Gary Sinise Foundation. We provide grants to first responders, training, equipment. We're doing all kinds of things. You can go to GarySiniseFoundation.org to learn more about our mission. And I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel there, because there you can see videos of multiple programs in action. You can see the people that we're trying to help and the impact that we're making with the generous support of the American people who just support us at our foundation.
I love that. That's amazing. Final question for you. And, I was thinking about this earlier, and I thought I'm going to conclude with it because I think you're a person of faith, right? And When you're doing the work that you're doing, you see there's a lot of suffering and a lot of struggle, and you see the human suffering. You've gone through your family, your own loss in the last year of your year and a half of your son, Mac, and which we talked about last time you were on with me. What has this work taught you about God, about faith? How has that part of you changed? Because again, you're helping meet those needs and you're seeing a lot of those struggles at the same time.
God wants us to help each other. Help each other. Life can be, there's a lot of suffering in life, but we can, and there's a lot of sinning in life. There's a lot of suffering in life. We can be redeemed. We can resurrect. We can revive.
Yeah.
I went through some rough times as a kid and some difficult times, things that I'm not necessarily proud of. Before I actually got on this journey from self to service, my book is called Grateful American, A Journey from Self to Service, and I am grateful. I live remembering that gratitude is something that we all want to have gratitude for something, right? We have gratitude for our family, for our loved ones. We have gratitude for people that try to help us through. We have gratitude for our country. What are we grateful for? And I realize I'm grateful for so many things. I've had a lot of blessings in my life, even through the most challenging times. And as you mentioned, our son went through just a terrible struggle with a very, very rare cancer called chordoma. Thankfully, we discovered there was a foundation called the Chordoma Foundation, and they were trying to help the small handful of chordoma patients that are diagnosed each year in the United States. And we were grateful for them. I'm grateful for the men and women who serve our country. And I know that God wants all of us to just be good to each other and help each other through tough times. And when we do that, when we lift others up, we lift ourselves. There's no question about it. I've seen it. I didn't stop doing the mission of the Gary Sinise Foundation throughout the entire time that I was battling hard for our son. Mac wanted me to continue that mission. He saw what going out on the mission did for me. When I came home, I was replenished because I could see that I was helping somebody out. And then I would come home and just have a new energy to try to find a miracle for our son and to help him through his daily life as a cancer patient in a hospital bed in his bedroom. It was difficult, but service can be a great healer. It helped me through the 9/11 chapter when our country was broken. And it certainly helped me through our time with our son. My wife was also diagnosed with breast cancer at the time. My dad had a stroke. It was a difficult, challenging time at the Sinise house with these health challenges. But on the other hand, my daughters started having babies and we had these beautiful new grandchildren. And so I said the blessings kind of kept us going and the gratitude kept us going. And I recommend it to anyone when you're hurting. You can help. You can help yourself by kind of stepping away and trying to help somebody else. And when you walk away knowing that you've had a positive impact on somebody, it can just remind you that you can get through. You can strengthen yourselves by helping others.
No, I love that. Jesus said the two biggest commandments when he was asked, love God and love others, right? Taking care of other people. And I think one of the things I've loved getting to talk with you over the years has just been your passion for service and your openness. Being an incredible American, an incredible father, the story with Mac and just everything you've shared. We just appreciate you joining us, taking us through all of this and the amazing work you do with your foundation. Thank you for your time today.
I sure appreciate you having me. Thanks very much.
That's all for today's Newsmakers. Make sure you head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel and cbnnews.com for more of the news you need to read. We'll see you again tomorrow.